I want you to think for just a second about your morning commute.
Oh boy.
Yeah, right? Or, well, if you work from home, think about that precise moment when you crack open your laptop.
And the screen just kind of flares to life and you stare at your inbox.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have the alarm clock buzzing in the dark, the desperate, almost medicinal rush for coffee.
Definitely medicinal.
Right, and you've got the brake lights and traffic, or just the endless stream of unread messages waiting to basically dictate exactly what you're going to do with the next 8, 10, maybe 12 hours of your day.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It is. And the thing is, we spend roughly a third of our waking lives doing this thing we call work.
A huge chunk of our time on Earth.
But, I mean, it goes so much deeper than just how we spend our time, right?
Yeah.
We use it to define our social status. We use it to sculpt our entire identity.
Oh, totally.
Like when you meet someone new at a party, before you ask about their hopes or, their hobbies or where they grew up, what is the very first question that comes out of your mouth?
What do you do?
What do you do?
Exactly.
It is the defining feature of modern adult existence. I mean, it is the water we swim in.
Right.
And because we are just so fully submerged in it, we don't even realize we're wet. We just assume that this is the natural state of being human.
But see, I've been looking through this stack of historical and anthropological research for our deep dive today, and I gotta say, it has completely unmoored me.
It's wild stuff, isn't it?
It really is. So the tension we are exploring today is this. What if the way we work right now, like this entire sprawling ecosystem of employers, wages, 40-hour weeks, and, tying our deepest personal worth to our economic output, what if none of that is an inevitable natural law of human existence?
Right. What if it's all made up?
Exactly. What if it is a completely fabricated social arrangement?
Well, the short answer is it absolutely is a fabricated arrangement.
And historically speaking, it's actually a shockingly recent invention. I mean, when you zoom out and look at the broad sweep of human history, the specific psychological and economic arrangement that you just described, the anxiety, the daily grind, the tie to personal identity, it's a bizarre anomaly.
A bizarre anomaly. I love that. And honestly, that realization is profound because, we all carry around these quiet, crushing anxieties every single day.
Constantly.
Like, am I working too much? Am I falling behind? Is my job actually meaningful? Or am I just pushing digital paper?
Or, am I going to be replaced by a software update next week?
Yes. The automation anxiety, which we'll definitely get into. But we can't actually process those anxieties until we take a really hard look at how the modern concept of employment was painstakingly constructed over centuries.
Right. We have to trace the bloodlines of modern work, essentially.
And what are those bloodlines exactly? Like, what is the mission for us today?
Well, the mission is looking at the mechanics of control.
Yeah.
Who has historically directed our labor? Why did they need to direct it? And this is the big one. How on earth did they convince the rest of us to go along with it?
Yeah. How did we buy into this?
Because the history of work is, at its very core, a history of power.
Okay, so let's start by wiping the slate clean. Let's go all the way back to the very beginning.
Let's do it.
We have this deep-seated assumption, right, that humans have always had to toil endlessly just to avoid starvation.
Right. The classic caveman myth.
Exactly. The popular image is the caveman constantly fighting off predators, working himself to the bone from dawn until dusk, just desperate to survive another single day.
Yeah, we totally project our modern anxieties about economic scarcity backward onto our prehistoric ancestors.
We do.
We assume that before civilization, before agriculture, life was just this endless, desperate hustle. But to understand how highly contingent our modern work life is, we have to examine what humans did before work even existed as a separate, distinct category of human life.
And this is where I want to bring in this essay from 1972 that just completely shatters that caveman myth. It was written by an anthropologist named Marshall Solins.
Oh, Solins, yes.
The title alone is just such a provocation. He called it the original affluent society.
Yeah, and the use of the word affluent there is incredibly deliberate.
Right, because normally we associate affluence with, like, yachts and mansions.
Exactly. Solins was making a highly controversial yet deeply rigorously researched argument here. He stated that hunter-gatherer societies were entirely affluent, but not because they possess a vast accumulation of material goods or, capital.
Right.
They were affluent because they desired very little.
They just wanted less.
Exactly. They met their survival needs with a level of astonishing efficiency that modern people can barely comprehend.
I mean, he looked at the actual time these societies spent on what we would classify as subsistence tasks, right?
Okay.
Like gathering food, hunting, fixing shelter, making tools.
The numbers are staggering.
They really are. We are talking about an average of roughly 3 to 5 hours a day.
It's incredible. And the data is remarkably consistent, especially when you look at groups like the Hadza people of Tanzania.
Right. I saw a lot of references to the Hadza in the material.
Yeah, so anthropologists have spent decades living with and observing the Hadza. They're one of the most studied contemporary hunter-gatherer societies on Earth.
Okay.
And the observations of their daily rhythms consistently align with Solons's theory. I mean, they spend about 4 to 6 hours a day on subsistence.
Wow.
That is it. Once the food is acquired, the work completely stops.
Wait, okay. So if they are only securing food for 4 to 6 hours, what are they doing for the remaining 10 hours of daylight?
They are simply living. I mean, the vast majority of their waking life is devoted to rest, to complex rituals, to play, to socializing, and, just taking care of each other.
That sounds pretty nice.
It does. But the vital distinction for you, the listener, to grasp here is that for the Hadza, there is no sharp demarcated boundary between work and life.
Ah, I see. Like hunting or foraging isn't a shift you clock into with a heavy heart, you know? It's woven seamlessly into the social fabric of the day. You go out with your friends or your family, you gather what is needed for the immediate future, and then you just stop.
It makes me think of the difference between running to catch a bus versus running on a treadmill.
Oh, I like that. Expand on that.
Well, foraging seems like the bus,
Right.
right? You see the bus pulling up, you exert a very intense, highly motivated burst of physical effort. You catch the bus,
Yeah.
and then you sit down.
You're done.
You're done. You only exert the effort when it is absolutely necessary for an immediate goal.
Exactly.
But modern work is like a treadmill that someone else plugged into the wall.
And lock the controls.
Right. It never turns off. You just have to keep walking day after day, and if you stop, you get thrown off the back into oblivion.
That is a phenomenal way to conceptualize the psychological shift. The treadmill is a modern invention. It's explicitly designed to extract continuous, predictable motion.
Now, I do want to add a layer of necessary nuance here, because we really must be careful not to completely romanticize the past.
Yeah, I was actually just thinking that. Like, it sounds like a perfect utopia to only work 4 hours a day and then hang out and play games, but nature is completely unforgiving.
Brutal, yeah.
Solons must be glossing over the genuinely terrifying parts of living in the wild, right? Like, what about disease? What about infant mortality? What about when a drought hits?
He definitely did gloss over it. And subsequent anthropologists have rigorously debated and, refined Solons's figures. The main critique is that he downplayed the genuine hardships of subsistence economies.
Which is fair.
Totally fair. There were periods of lean resources, the mortality rates were high, and nature is, as you said, brutal. So we absolutely shouldn't view it as an idyllic Eden.
Right. We don't want to live in the woods without modern medicine.
Exactly. However, the core structural insight of his argument has absolutely held up to modern scientific scrutiny.
Which is what?
That pre-agricultural humans simply did not work in the modern sense of relentless, daily scheduled toil.
Right. And the proof isn't just in observing modern foragers. We have the physical receipts for this shift in human behavior. It is written literally into our bones.
Oh, the skeletal evidence. Yes. It's undeniable proof. And it comes from the agricultural revolution, which occurred roughly 10,000 years ago?
About 10,000 years ago, yeah.
So when human populations began shifting from foraging to settled farming, the skeletal evidence tells a very dramatic, very agonizing story.
What happens to the bones?
Well, when paleopathologists compare the skeletons of early agricultural societies to the foragers who immediately preceded them, they see massive sudden increases in severe arthritis, catastrophic dental decay, and just stark nutritional deficiencies.
Which, that feels totally backwards. The whole narrative of human progress suggests that inventing farming gave us a stable, secure food supply.
Right, life was supposed to get better.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was a monumental, species-altering trade-off. Agriculture allowed a single acre of land to produce significantly more caloric output, right? Which meant that land could suddenly support a much larger population.
More food means more people.
Yes, but it required a staggering, back-breaking increase in human labor to achieve that output. Think about the mechanics of early farming.
You don't have tractors.
You have zero tractors. You had to chop down trees to clear the land, till the heavy soil by hand, plant the seeds, weed the crops for months, harvest everything in a frantic rush.
And process the grain.
Process the grain, build storehouses, and then defend those storehouses from pests and raiders.
So you really went from catching the bus to running on the treadmill.
Precisely. Agriculture meant more humans could exist on the planet simultaneously. But the average human existed with vastly worse health, a narrower, grain-heavy diet, and far more grueling, endless labor.
So humanity basically walks blindfolded into this agricultural trap,
Pretty much.
where we figure out how to feed thousands of people in a concentrated area, but the cost is that the actual day-to-day experience of life becomes intense, backbreaking labor from sunup to sundown.
Yeah.
But here is the fundamental truth about human nature, right? Nobody actively desires to do that. Given the choice between lunging in the shade and breaking rocks in a hot field, every single human is going to choose the shade.
100%.
So if farming is that miserable, how did early societies actually ensure that the fields got plowed and the monuments got built?
Well, through the brutal application of power. Power, coercion, and the creation of a cultural mythology that viewed physical labor with absolute unmitigated contempt.
Okay, let's examine ancient Greece and Rome, because the cultural image we have is incredibly romanticized. Like, we picture brilliant men in white togas standing around marble columns, inventing democracy and debating philosophy.
Right, the golden age of thought. But the only reason those men had the time and energy to stand around debating the nature of democracy was because their entire economy was built heavily on compelled labor. Primarily, extreme systems of slavery, yes. In the ancient world, slavery wasn't just a peripheral, unfortunate practice. It was the foundational economic engine of civilization.
Which is hard to even wrap our modern minds around.
It is. I mean, if you look at Rome, at the height of the empire, historians estimate that somewhere between 20% to 40% of the total population were enslaved.
40%. That is an incomprehensible scale of human subjugation.
It is complete legal ownership of other human beings, extracting their total productive capacity through the threat of horrific violence.
Yeah.
But what is truly vital for our deep dive today isn't just the sheer economic reality of ancient slavery, it's how that system completely warped the cultural valuation of labor itself.
Right, because if the enslaved people are doing all the hard physical work, then the act of doing hard physical work inherently becomes associated with the degradation of being enslaved.
You've hit the nail on the head. In ancient Greek culture, physical work wasn't just something you preferred to avoid because you were lazy. It was considered deeply spiritually degrading. It was explicitly for the lowly. For free citizens, for the elite, engaging in manual labor was a literal loss of dignity.
Oh, wow.
The proper occupation for a citizen was engaging in politics, studying philosophy, waging warfare, and managing your household estate.
Which, practically speaking, meant managing the enslaved people who were doing the actual sweating.
Exactly.
So if I went back in a time machine to ancient Athens and started talking about, the dignity of labor or putting in an honest day's work, they would look at me like I was completely insane.
They would have found our modern glorification of the hard worker utterly baffling.
Yeah.
Like even repulsive.
Repulsive, wow.
And Aristotle actually provided the intellectual rationalization for this entire social structure.
Wait, Aristotle, the famous philosopher.
The very same. He argued that some people were, in his exact words, slaves by nature.
Slaves by nature? How did he possibly justify that? Did he just say, well, we conquered them, so they belong to us?
No, he went much deeper into twisted biology and philosophy. He claimed it wasn't merely an accident of being captured in a war. He believed it was a natural biological hierarchy.
Oh, that's dark.
Very. He argued that some human minds were inherently designed for reason, virtue, and leadership, while other bodies were designed merely for physical toil, lacking full intellectual capacity.
So he just invents a biological excuse?
He used philosophy to justify a system that conveniently allowed him and his peers to avoid the horrors of the agricultural treadmill.
That's incredibly convenient for Aristotle, isn't it?
Very convenient.
So Aristotle successfully brainwashes an entire civilization into thinking physical work is a mark of biological inferiority. But, as we know, an empire built entirely on enslaved labor eventually collapses under its own weight.
Rome falls.
Right, Rome falls. The centralized slave markets break down. But when the dust finally settles and we move into medieval Europe, the ruling class still needs someone to grow the food.
You still got to eat.
So how do they force the labor if they don't have massive Roman slave armies?
Well, they transitioned to feudalism, and specifically the system of serfdom.
Okay, serfdom.
Structurally, the extraction of labor remains quite similar, but the legal and religious frameworks shift dramatically. Serfs in medieval Europe were not chattel property in the Roman sense.
Right, they weren't bought and sold at markets.
Exactly. A medieval lord couldn't necessarily just sell a serf on an auction block to someone in another country. However, serfs were legally and inextricably tied to the land. They were bound to the estate.
So they were basically part of the real estate.
Essentially, yes. In exchange for military protection from the local lord, and keep in mind, protection that was often needed against that very same lord's rivals, the serf owed a crushing amount of labor.
Right. What did that look like on a day-to-day basis?
This typically meant working several days a week purely on the Lord's fields, handing over a massive share of the harvest, and then desperately trying to grow enough on their own tiny, allotted plot to keep their family from starving through the winter.
I mean, it operates entirely like a mafia protection racket, doesn't it? But it's sanctioned by the state.
Yes.
And even more importantly, it's sanctioned by the church.
The theological framing of work during the medieval period is just fascinating, and it's crucial to our story today.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Because the medieval Catholic worldview didn't view physical labor as a mark of biological inferiority like the Greeks did, but they framed it quite literally as a divine punishment.
Ah, right. This goes straight back to the book of Genesis.
Exactly.
Adam and Eve eat the apple, they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and God says, "By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground."
Work was the literal, inescapable curse of original sin. It was the punishment for humanity's fall from grace.
So it's still fundamentally negative.
Highly negative. Now, there were some subtle theological nuances introduced over the centuries. The Benedictine monks, for instance, introduced the famous motto, ora et labora, pray and work.
Oh, okay. So did they actually elevate the status of working then?
Marginally, yeah, but only within a very strict spiritual context. They tried to integrate manual labor into monastic practice, viewing it as a necessary way to build humility, enforce discipline, and avoid the sins of idleness.
Oh, like idle hands are the devil's workshop.
Exactly that sentiment. It was a slight departure from the Greek idea that work was entirely worthless. But even within those monastery walls, the hierarchy remained absolute.
How so?
Quiet, spiritual contemplation, reading the scriptures, and prayer were always ranked strictly and vastly above physical toil.
So even among the monks?
Oh, yeah. If you were a monk who spent all day copying manuscripts in the scriptorium, you held a higher status than the monks sweating in the abbey's garden pulling weeds.
Which is wild because you see the exact same dynamic today. The modern corporate hierarchy values the ideas guy, the executive doing the contemplation in the boardroom, vastly more than the warehouse worker doing the physical lifting.
It's the exact same structure, just secularized.
So, to summarize the journey so far, for thousands of years of human civilization, from the dawn of farming through the pharaohs, the Caesars, and the medieval kings, literally nobody thought that working hard at a physical job made you a better, more noble, or more realized person.
No one.
It was just a miserable, unavoidable necessity that you forced other people to do if you had the political or physical power to make them.
That is the unvarnished truth.
Yeah.
For the vast majority of recorded human history, to work hard meant you were firmly trapped at the bottom of the social pyramid.
Which brings us to a massive, screaming contradiction that we have to resolve.
Let's hear it.
If ancient and medieval societies hated physical labor so passionately and viewed it as divine punishment for original sin or a mark of enslavement, how on earth did we inherit the culture we have today?
Right, because things are very different now.
Very different. Because today, we actively brag about 60-hour work weeks. We have this entire inescapable hustle culture. People put phrases like rise and grind in their social media bios.
Oh, yeah.
We measure our entire self-worth by our productivity. How did we go from work is a curse to work is the ultimate measure of my moral worth?
To understand that massive psychological and cultural flip, we have to look at the work of a pioneering sociologist named Max Weber.
Max Weber.
Right. In 1905, he published a foundational essay that remains one of the most influential and debated ideas in all of modern social science. It's called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism.
Oh, I hear the phrase Protestant work ethic thrown around constantly, usually by politicians talking about bootstraps and pulling yourself up. But what did Weber actually mean by it?
Well, Weber argued that the profound cultural transformation brought about by Calvinist Protestantism during the Reformation fundamentally rewired the human brain regarding our relationship to work.
Rewired our brains. Okay.
To understand the mechanics of this rewiring, we really have to plunge into the intense, almost terrifying theology of John Calvin, specifically a concept known as predestination.
Predestination. Okay, this is the theological concept that the script of your life and your afterlife is already written before you even take your first breath.
It is absolute, uncompromising determinism.
Right.
Calvinism held that God is infinitely all-knowing and all-powerful. Therefore, because God exists outside of time, God has already decided who is destined for salvation heaven and who is destined for eternal damnation hell.
Wow.
And this list was finalized before the universe was even created.
So nothing you do matters.
In terms of changing God's mind, absolutely nothing matters.
Yeah.
No amount of good deeds, no charitable giving, no desperate prayers, no church rituals, no sacraments can alter your fate. The list is sealed.
Okay, let's just pause and try to imagine the sheer psychological terror of living with that belief in the 17th century.
It's heavy.
I mean, when hell was a very real, very literal place of burning sulfur in your mind, it is like having a credit score for your eternal soul, but you aren't allowed to check it.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it. A hidden spiritual credit score.
You just have to wander around blindly for your entire life, hoping you are in the green, knowing that if you're in the red, you are going to burn for eternity, and there is literally nothing you can do to fix it.
Right.
That kind of uncertainty would drive a person clinically insane.
And it basically did drive them to the brink. Weber coined a term for this specific psychological torment. He called it salvation anxiety.
Salvation anxiety.
It created massive, crushing psychological stress across entire European populations. I mean, people were utterly desperate. They needed a sign. They needed some kind of tangible earthly evidence that they were part of the elect, the chosen few who were saved.
Because if you can't earn your way into heaven by doing good deeds, you at least want to look around your daily life and find clues that you're already on the VIT list.
Exactly. And this is where the brilliant, arguably accidental theological pivot happens.
Okay.
To soothe this unbearable salvation anxiety in their congregations, Calvinist ministers started preaching the concept of the calling.
The call.
They began to suggest that worldly occupational success was the primary visible indicator of God's grace.
Wait, hold on. They flipped it so that making money became a sign of holiness.
Yes, but with a very specific, highly restrictive set of behavioral rules attached. It wasn't just about getting rich and throwing lavish, decadent parties. In fact, that would prove you were damned.
Oh, of course. Too much fun is definitely a sin.
Right. It was about diligent, systematic, rational, disciplined work. If you work tirelessly in your chosen profession, your calling, and you successfully accumulated wealth, but you absolutely refuse to waste that wealth on luxury, idleness, or sinful pleasures, well, what do you do with the money you've saved?
Well, you can't buy a fancy carriage, you can't buy expensive wine, so I guess you reinvest it, you expand the workshop, you buy more materials, you work even harder.
Bingo. You enter an endless loop of capital accumulation and reinvestment. And the ministers basically told them, if you are lazy, if you spend your money on fancy clothes and wine, that lack of discipline is a sure sign you are destined for hell.
Oh.
But if you are at the shop every single day at dawn, grinding away, building your business, denying yourself worldly pleasure, that proves you possess the discipline of the elect. You must be saved.
It is a breathtakingly brilliant psychological trick.
Isn't it?
You take existential, paralyzing terror about the afterlife, and you channel it directly into relentless economic productivity.
And Weber argued that this specific theological cocktail, this anxiety channeled into ascetic, disciplined labor and reinvestment, is what provided the initial explosive fuel for modern capitalism.
That is just fascinating.
Now, it is important to note that historians and sociologists have fiercely debated Weber's empirical accuracy for over a century now. Many argue that the historical causation is much messier than he portrayed, pointing out that proto-capitalist systems were already brewing in Catholic Italy for other economic reasons.
Sure, grand historical models always have holes. But regardless of whether the theology was the sole cause of capitalism, the cultural legacy of that mindset is undeniably real. We are still living in the shadow of it today.
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the United States, which was heavily settled by Puritan groups carrying this exact ideological framework in their cultural DNA.
Right.
Over the centuries, the explicit religious theology faded away from many people, but the secularized behavioral shell remained completely intact.
So the hustle culture we see today.
The hustle culture, the guilt you feel when you sit on the couch on a Tuesday night, doing nothing, that is the ghost of Calvinist salvation anxiety.
Wow.
We no longer consciously think that answering emails at 9 p.m. guarantees us a spot in heaven, but we absolutely still treat hard work as a profound moral virtue. And conversely, we deeply structurally judge people who are unemployed or perceived as unproductive as having a fundamental moral failing.
That explains so much about modern attitudes toward welfare and unemployment.
It really does.
So the Protestant work ethic implants the engine inside our own heads. It gives us the internal moral drive to work constantly. But to get the modern world, to get the morning commute and the alarm clock, we need more than just a psychological desire to work hard.
We need structure.
Right, we need a schedule. We need a way to measure the grind. Which brings us to the Industrial Revolution and the invention of arguably the most tyrannical device in human history.
The clock.
The clock.
This is a profound shift that is rarely discussed. The Industrial Revolution did not merely change the physical tools we use to work. It fundamentally altered the human relationship with time itself.
This is where things get really rigid.
Very. To fully grasp this, we have to look at the work of the brilliant historian E.P. Thompson. In 1967, he wrote a landmark, perspective-shifting essay called Time, Work Discipline, and Industrial Capitalism.
I find this transition so fascinating because it exposes how completely unnatural the 9-to-5 schedule actually is for the human body.
Oh, completely unnatural.
Yeah.
Thompson pointed out that prior to the rise of factories, agricultural and artisanal work was what anthropologists call task-oriented.
Task-oriented, what does that mean in practice?
A farmer worked until the harvest was gathered in before the rain. A shoemaker worked until the batch of shoes was finished. The rhythm of the work was entirely determined by the weather, the season, the immediate necessity of the physical task, and the biological capacity of the human body.
So it wasn't a steady 8 hours every day.
Not at all. It was highly irregular. There were periods of intense, frantic labor during planting or harvest, followed by long periods of rest, socializing, or slower, easier tasks during the winter.
Okay, it's the difference between doing your laundry at home versus doing laundry at a factory.
Oh, I see where you're going. Explain.
Like, when I do laundry at home, it's a task-oriented process. I wash the clothes, I dry them, I fold them, and when the basket is empty, the task is done. I stop, I go watch a movie. I don't keep standing in front of the washing machine just because it's only 3:00 p.m. and I haven't put in my 8 hours.
Perfect analogy.
But time-oriented work is a boss telling you to stand in front of that washing machine and scrub for exactly 8 hours, even if the clothes are already perfectly clean.
That is exactly it. And it perfectly captures the friction of the factory system. Because suddenly, during the Industrial Revolution, you have these massive, incredibly expensive machines powered by water wheels or steam engines.
And machines don't need to sleep.
The machine does not get tired. The machine does not care if it's raining. The machine runs at a continuous, fixed mechanical speed. So for the factory owner to get a return on their massive capital investment, they need that expensive machine running constantly.
And that means they need human workers to be synchronized to the rhythm of the machine.
Yes. The human becomes an extension of the gears. And suddenly, you aren't being paid for the 5 pairs of shoes you make. You are being paid for the time you spend standing next to the machine. Time literally becomes a commodity. It becomes money.
That's a huge psychological shift.
Massive. And this transition was not peaceful at all. It was incredibly violent and fiercely resisted by the working class.
Right, because people weren't used to it.
Pre-industrial workers absolutely hated time discipline. It felt deeply unnatural and oppressive to them. Thompson documents all these amazing, often suppressed historical accounts of workers just outright refusing to comply with the clock.
What did they do?
They would show up late. They would work intensely for 2 or 3 days to make enough money to survive the week, and then just disappear to the pub for the rest of the time.
I love that. They had the incredible tradition, right? Saint Monday.
Yes, St. Monday was a widespread unofficial tradition where workers, having spent Sunday drinking, recovering, and socializing, would simply refuse to show up to the factory on Monday.
I feel like we should bring that back.
It was a massive systemic headache for the early industrialists, I can tell you that.
But wait, if adults were so rebellious and kept skipping work on Mondays, how did these factory owners ever manage to staff their mills? Did they just arrest people?
Sometimes they used the law and the police, yes. They instituted brutal fines for being even a minute late. They locked the factory gates precisely at 6:00 a.m., so latecomers lost a whole day's wage. And they hired strict foremen to constantly monitor and physically discipline the workers.
It sounds like a prison.
It functioned very similarly.
Yeah.
But they found a much more insidious long-term solution.
Which was?
The factory owners realized that it was incredibly difficult to break the will of adult workers who remembered the old, task-oriented ways of life. If you can't break the adults, you mold the children.
Oh, wow. So the prevalence of child labor during the Industrial Revolution wasn't just because they could pay them pennies.
It was a horrific but highly calculated part of a behavioral conditioning strategy. Child labor was, in part, a way to indoctrinate an entirely new generation into strict time discipline from the moment they could walk.
That is deeply disturbing.
If you raise a child inside the deafening roar of the textile mill, they never knew the task-oriented rhythms of the farm. They never knew the freedom of St. Monday. They only knew the whistle, the factory clock, and the ceaseless, unyielding pace of the machine. You were literally manufacturing compliant workers for the future.
That is deeply chilling. And it really frames all the workplace metrics that we take as absolute, unquestionable facts of nature today. The 8-hour day, the 5-day work week, the concept of a weekend, the retirement age. None of these fell from the sky.
No, they didn't.
They aren't biological imperatives. They were fiercely fought over.
They were invented, and they were bled for. They were established by early labor movements over decades of bitter strikes, riots, and political organizing. The 8-hour day, for instance, was a central, radical demand starting in the 1880s.
What was their slogan?
The workers' slogan was literally 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. They were fighting to reclaim a third of their existence from the machine.
But the 8-hour day didn't just become law because of progressive politicians or union strikes, did it? I mean, it was also heavily adopted by capitalists like Henry Ford.
Yes, Henry Ford is very famous for adopting the 8-hour day and the 5-day work week at the Ford Motor Company in 1914. But let's be crystal clear about his motivations.
It wasn't charity.
He did not do it out of the goodness of his heart or some worker-friendly utopian sentiment. He did it because assembling cars on an early rudimentary assembly line was so psychologically monotonous and physically exhausting that his employee turnover rate was catastrophic.
People just kept quitting.
Constantly. He was constantly having to halt production to hire and train new people, which was incredibly expensive.
So how did he figure out that 8 hours was the magic number? Why not 9 or 7?
Ford discovered through rigorous internal tracking and observation that human endurance had a mathematical limit. If he pushed workers past 8 hours on the line, they became deeply fatigued, their error rates skyrocketed, they got injured, and ultimately they quit.
So it was just data-driven.
Completely. He realized that if he reduced the hours to 8 and doubled the pay to $5 a day, his workers were less fatigued, they made far fewer errors, overall daily productivity actually increased, and they stopped quitting. The 8-hour day was a capitalist optimization strategy just as much as it was a labor victory. It was the absolute maximum amount of time a human being could function as a biological machine, proof before breaking down.
That is so wild. So we basically spent over a century fighting literal wars in the streets, striking and optimizing spreadsheets to establish the physical boundaries of the factory clock.
Yep.
We built this massive temporal wall around our lives. For 8 hours, you belong to the boss. The rest of the time, you belong to yourself.
A great compromise.
Right. But then, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the fundamental nature of the work changes again. We transition away from manufacturing and enter the era of knowledge work. And knowledge work comes along and completely detonates those hard-won boundaries.
It absolutely obliterated them. This brings us to a pervasive, invisible crisis in the modern workplace. You see, industrial work, for all of its physical brutality, danger, and monotony, had one distinct psychological advantage.
Which was?
It was legible.
Legible, meaning it was easy to read, easy to see?
Exactly. It was physically contained. It had a clear, definitive start and end. It happened in a specific physical location. When the factory worker walks out the gate at 5:00 p.m., their labor is finished. They literally cannot take the heavy assembly line home with them.
Right. You can't build a Ford Model T in your living room.
Exactly. The boundary between work time and lifetime is physical and undeniable. But knowledge work thinking, analyzing data, strategizing, writing, communicating, managing relationships is entirely invisible and practically borderless.
Because your brain doesn't just clock out at 5:00 p.m.
No, it doesn't.
Thinking doesn't stop when you swipe your badge and leave the office building. And more importantly, the tools of our modern work don't stay in the office either. The email can arrive at 11:00 p.m. The Slack message makes your phone vibrate in your pocket while you're eating dinner with your family. The spreadsheet follows you on your vacation.
It is ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And computer scientist and author Cal Newport has done some vital, incredibly insightful research on this phenomenon, particularly concerning what he calls deep work.
Deep work, right?
He documents how this always-on culture, this expectation of immediate digital responsiveness, is not merely a modern annoyance, it is neurologically and cognitively disastrous.
Okay, I want to ask the listener to picture something because this analogy really helped me. Have you ever tried to read a really complex, dense book, maybe a history book or a difficult novel? Well, someone stands right next to you and literally pokes you in the shoulder every 3 minutes to ask a random, unrelated question.
Just poking you, hey, did you see this?
Exactly. How well do you actually comprehend that book? And how utterly exhausted do you feel after just an hour of that? That is what chronic cognitive fragmentation feels like, and it is exactly how most of us are expected to work every single day.
That analogy of being poked while reading is perfect, and it translates directly to what is happening in the brain. Newport points out that the constant partial attention demanded by our digital tools creates what researchers call attention residue.
Attention residue.
Think of your brain like a computer processor. When you are deeply focused on writing a complex report, your brain loads all that relevant information into its active working memory, its RAM.
Okay.
When a Slack notification pops up and you switch to answer a quick question about a different project, your brain has to dump the report's RAM and load the new project's RAM.
And doing that over and over again drains the battery.
It drains it incredibly fast. The knowledge worker who never fully disengages, who is checking email under the table at dinner, is not actually working more effectively or producing more value.
We're just stressed.
They're operating in a persistent low-grade state of background anxiety and neurological fragmentation. This drastically reduces the quality of the highly valuable, complex cognitive work they're supposedly being paid to do, and it completely destroys their brain's ability to truly rest and recover.
So we were already frayed, right? Operating with these porous digital boundaries. And then a massive global catalyst accelerates the whole process.
COVID.
The COVID-19 pandemic hits and remote work explodes overnight.
Which proved to be an incredibly complex double-edged sword. On one hand, remote work alleviated some major friction points for millions of people. The soul-crushing, unpaid, hour-long commute was eliminated.
True, getting that time back was huge.
There was suddenly greater flexibility in when certain tasks could be performed, allowing people to integrate childcare or errands. But on the other hand, it detonated a nuclear bomb on whatever fragile physical boundaries were left.
Right. When your office is your kitchen table or, the corner of your bedroom, the physical structural boundary between the place where I produce economic value and the place where I rest and just exist as a human being ceases to exist entirely.
You aren't working from home anymore. You are sleeping at the office.
Sleeping at the office, that is such a stark way to put it.
And this leads us to a profound, almost tragic irony about the current moment.
Okay.
We are doing work that is mentally exhausting, completely borderless, and increasingly intrusive on our most private moments. Logically, given how draining this treadmill is, we should be absolutely thrilled that there are machines and algorithms on the horizon that might take this work off our hands.
We should be throwing a parade. Bring on the robots. Let them answer the emails.
But we aren't throwing a parade. Instead, we are terrified. The automation anxiety right now is palpable in every industry.
So let's pivot and talk about artificial intelligence and the future of work. Because the fear of technological unemployment, this deep-seated fear that machines will make human labor entirely obsolete, is not a new phenomenon at all.
Far from it. This anxiety has accompanied every major wave of technological change since the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The classic, most misunderstood example, of course, is the Luddites.
Right, the Luddites in England in the 1810s. I mean, people use the term Luddite today as a pejorative, right? An insult for someone who is stubborn or who can't figure out how to use a smartphone or a self-checkout machine. We frame them as anti-technology out of pure ignorance. But that isn't historically accurate, is it?
Not at all. The Luddites were not ignorant, and they were not inherently anti-technology. They were highly skilled, well-compensated textile workers, master artisans who took pride in their craft.
So they knew what they were doing.
They absolutely did. And they looked at the new mechanized, steam-powered looms being introduced by the factory owners and correctly recognized exactly what was going to happen.
They saw the writing on the wall.
They saw that these machines were going to destroy their livelihoods, permanently devalue their specialized skills, and force them and their children into the brutal, low-wage time-disciplined factory system we discussed earlier.
So when they broke into the mills under the cover of darkness and smashed the looms with hammers, they weren't just throwing a temper tantrum.
No.
They were fighting a desperate guerrilla war for their economic survival.
Exactly. It was a targeted labor negotiation by sabotage. But historically speaking, when we look back at the last 200 years of industrial capitalism, the Luddites' worst existential fears of permanent society-wide mass unemployment did not come true.
Which is the cornerstone of the historical optimist argument today regarding AI, right?
Yes. The historical optimists look at the data and argue that while automation does absolutely eliminate specific jobs, sometimes millions of them, in a painful transition, it never creates permanent mass unemployment.
Because it shifts things around.
Because technology drastically increases productivity, it lowers the cost of goods, which frees up consumer capital. That freed up capital, combined with new technological capabilities, creates entirely new industries that eventually absorb the displaced workers.
Okay, the classic textbook example of this is farming. Let's look at the numbers. In the year 1900, roughly 50% of the United States labor force worked in agriculture. Half the country was still out in the fields.
Yep.
Today, because of the invention of tractors, chemical fertilizers, automated irrigation, and mechanized supply chains, it is about 2%.
It's an astounding structural shift. We eliminated roughly 48% of the jobs in what was the economy's largest sector, yet we do not have a 48% unemployment rate today.
Right, we aren't all just sitting around.
The children and grandchildren of those displaced farmers did not just sit idle. They went on to become electricians, airline pilots, software engineers, nurses, and podcast hosts, jobs that the farmers of 1900 couldn't even conceptualize, let alone train for.
So this is the million-dollar question that is keeping policymakers awake at night. Is the AI revolution just tractors all over again, just another painful but ultimately beneficial transition? Or is this time fundamentally, structurally different?
That is the debate currently raging among the world's top economists and technologists. Let's look closely at both sides.
Let's do it.
The optimists, like the prominent labor economist David Otter, argue that the historical pattern will hold steady. They argue that AI will primarily automate specific tasks within a job, not the entire job itself.
Okay, so under that model, the AI writes the first rough draft of the legal brief, taking seconds instead of hours.
Exactly.
But the human lawyer still reviews it, strategizes the nuanced angle of the case, and actually goes to court to talk to the client and the judge. The AI just makes the lawyer way more productive.
Right. And by making humans vastly more productive, it lowers the cost of legal services, which increases demand for lawyers, and ultimately creates new complementary roles that require a human touch.
That makes sense.
But then you have the pessimists, thinkers, like Martin Ford, and their argument is deeply unsettling.
The pessimist case always feels more visceral. What is their core argument for why AI is different from the tractor?
Ford points out a crucial distinction. Previous ways of automation were primarily mechanical or physical. The tractor replaced human muscle. The assembly line replaced human dexterity.
Right.
But throughout all of that physical automation, humans still retained an absolute monopoly on cognition, on complex judgment, on nuanced pattern recognition, and on communication.
Which is our whole thing as a species.
It's our edge. AI is uniquely and aggressively targeting cognitive and judgment-based work. It is encroaching on the very sanctuary where displaced manual laborers historically fled.
Oh, that makes total sense. Like, if the machine can lift the heavy boxes in the warehouse, you get a job sitting at a desk doing the spreadsheets that track the boxes. But if the machine can lift the boxes, and the machine can do the spreadsheets, and write the underlying code, and analyze the legal contracts, and generate the marketing copy, where does the human go? What sanctuary is left?
Exactly. The pessimists argue that AI represents what economists call a general-purpose technology, but one that is scaling at an exponential speed that might simply overwhelm the broader economy's ability to invent new, economically viable jobs to replace the lost ones.
Wow.
If a machine can learn to do anything a human can do on a computer and do it 1,000,000 times faster and for a fraction of a cent, the economic value of average human cognition plummets to zero.
Okay, so we have these two incredibly compelling, completely contradictory arguments. Who is actually right?
If we were being completely honest, setting aside all the confident think pieces, nobody truly knows.
Really? Just nobody knows.
The historical precedent is genuinely ambiguous, and perhaps completely irrelevant when you try to apply it to a technology with the rapidly expanding generalized capabilities of modern AI. The economic models that economists use to project future employment effects are all built on historical assumptions about human limitations.
So they're using old maps for a new territory.
Exactly. If the fundamental rules of the game are changing, if the machine can actually think, those models cannot be confirmed in advance. We are flying blind into a Category 5 hurricane.
Okay, let's run a thought experiment because this is where the research gets incredibly profound.
Let's do it.
Let's imagine for a moment that the pessimists are absolutely right. AI scales exponentially. In 20 years, it takes 40, 50, maybe 60% of all jobs, both manual and cognitive.
Huge disruption.
Huge. Human labor becomes largely obsolete for the functioning of society, but miraculously, society adapts economically without a total collapse.
Okay, best case scenario for a jobless future.
Right. We heavily tax the AI. We tax the massive corporate profits generated by this unprecedented productivity, and we institute a generous universal basic income, UBI.
Right.
Every citizen gets a check every month that comfortably covers housing, food, healthcare, and a bit of leisure. We solve the economic problem of scarcity. We can all finally get off the treadmill.
Sounding pretty good so far.
We can go back to being like the Hadza hunter-gatherers, but without the danger of starvation or disease. We just play, socialize, create art, and rest all day. Problem solved, right?
Okay.
We finally reached utopia.
It sounds like a perfect, frictionless utopia. But the psychological reality, backed by nearly a century of sociological data, suggests it might actually be a dystopia.
Dystopia.
Because that utopian UBI scenario fundamentally misunderstands what work actually does for human beings beneath the surface.
Wait, so even if I hit the literal lottery tomorrow and the government guarantees I will never need to work a day in my life for money ever again, you're saying I might still have a massive problem.
Yes, a profound psychological problem.
Okay.
And to understand exactly why, we have to look back at a landmark, incredibly moving piece of sociological research. During the depths of the Great Depression in the early 1930s, a researcher named Marie Jahoda conducted a pioneering study in a small, tight-knit industrial town in Austria called Marienthal.
Marienthal. Okay, why Marienthal? What made it special?
Well, Marienthal was effectively a company town. It had one major factory, a massive textile mill, and it employed almost everyone in the community.
Okay.
When the Depression hit, the global markets collapsed, and the factory abruptly closed its doors. Almost the entire town became unemployed simultaneously overnight.
That's devastating.
It was. Now, the Austrian government at the time did step in and provide a form of unemployment relief. It wasn't a luxury income, it was meager, but it generally prevented mass starvation. The people were surviving biologically and economically.
Okay, so the basic needs were met.
Right. Jahoda and her research team went into Marienthal to study what happens to the social and psychological fabric of a community when the necessity of work simply vanishes.
Okay, the obvious one is losing the paycheck, which causes stress. You can't buy as much food. But if the government is covering the basic survival needs, what exactly did Jahoda find? What is the psychological load-bearing wall that collapsed in this town?
She found total cascading psychological devastation.
Wow.
Jahoda discovered what she later called the latent functions of employment. The manifest or instrumental function of work is obvious to everyone. You earn money to buy food and pay rent.
Right.
But the latent functions are the invisible, deep psychological and social structures that work provides to our minds. We usually don't even realize they're there until they are suddenly stripped away.
I'm fascinated by this. What exactly are these latent functions? Let's walk through them.
Jahoda identified 5 critical latent functions, and when you hear them, it completely reframes how you view your job.
Okay, what's number 1?
First is time structure. Work imposes a rigid external structure on your day, your week, and your year. It tells you when to wake up and when to rest. Without it, the people in Marienthal experienced a profound, disorienting formlessness.
Oh, that makes sense.
The researchers noted that men would just stand on street corners for hours, doing nothing. They stopped wearing watches. They couldn't keep track of the days of the week because Tuesday felt exactly the same as Saturday.
That terrifying feeling of endless, unstructured time. I think a lot of people felt a tiny fraction of that during the early lockdowns of the pandemic.
Exactly. When all the days blurred together, what was the second function? Second is social contact. Work forces you to interact regularly and systematically with a diverse group of people outside of your immediate chosen family circle. It grounds you in a broader community.
Right.
You have to navigate personalities, cooperate, and share a physical or virtual space.
That makes complete sense. If I'm honest, the vast majority of my casual social interactions, the small talk, the shared complaints, the inside jokes, are with colleagues or clients.
Right.
If I didn't have to work, my social circle would shrink dramatically.
Exactly. Third is collective purpose. Even if your specific daily job feels mundane or tedious, you are participating in a shared enterprise that is larger than yourself. You are contributing to a goal that requires a group effort, whether that's manufacturing a car or running a hospital. Humans possess a deep psychological need to feel useful to the tribe.
And the fourth.
Fourth is social status and identity. Work provides a socially recognized role. It tells you who you are in relation to the rest of society, which, whether we like it or not, is the foundation of much of our self-respect.
It answers that party question. What do you do?
Exactly. Without a recognized role, people feel invisible and culturally untethered.
And what's the last one?
And finally, the fifth is regular activity. The sheer necessity of having to show up forces a baseline of physical and cognitive engagement that prevents deterioration.
So when the factory gates in Marienthal locked for the last time, it wasn't just the flow of capital that stopped. The entire psychological scaffolding of the town collapsed.
It was a collapse of meaning. The researchers observed a massive tragic spike in apathy and clinical depression. There was a complete withdrawal from civic and social life.
Over what kind of time frame?
Just a matter of months. The town's library lending rates plummeted. People actually stopped reading because they couldn't focus. They stopped participating in local politics. The social clubs disbanded. People just shrank into themselves, consumed by a pervasive lethargy.
That is heartbreaking.
And the critical point is that this wasn't an isolated incident unique to Austria in the 1930s.
This has been replicated.
Endlessly.
Yeah.
Decades of subsequent global sociological and psychological studies have confirmed Jehota's findings.
Really?
The experience of long-term unemployment is deeply, structurally, psychologically destructive in ways that far exceed what the loss of income alone predicts.
So it's not just the money.
Not at all. Even in modern Nordic countries, which have incredibly generous, robust welfare states that replace the vast majority of a displaced worker's lost income, the data is clear. The loss of those 5 latent functions causes immense psychological damage, leading to higher rates of depression, addiction, and social isolation.
Which completely upends the tech utopian vision of universal basic income as a silver bullet.
It totally complicates it.
Because if AI takes the jobs and we just hand everyone a government check and say, okay, the robots have got this, go paint a picture, go find your bliss, we might be inadvertently condemning millions of people to a life of profound emptiness, anxiety, and social isolation.
That is the true hidden challenge of the automation scenario. The most thoughtful analysts of the future of work take the Marienthal findings very seriously.
We have to.
We cannot just blithely assume that providing an economic safety net solves the human problem. We are creatures who, for thousands of years, have derived our meaning, our daily structure, and our sense of belonging from the tasks we perform and the struggles we overcome together.
Man, this has been an absolutely mind-bending journey.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. Let's look back at the incredible trajectory we've mapped out today. We started with the Hadza hunter-gatherers living the original affluent society, foraging for a few hours a day and seamlessly weaving their survival into their social lives.
Right. Catching the bus.
And then we moved through the agonizing trap of the agricultural revolution, where human beings traded their health and broke their backs to feed growing populations.
Stepping onto the treadmill.
Exactly. We saw how ancient empires and medieval lords used the brutal threat of violence and deep cultural contempt to force the subjugated classes to do the physical labor. We tracked the massive psychological earthquake of the Protestant work ethic, where the terrifying anxiety of divine damnation was miraculously transformed into a relentless internal drive for worldly productivity.
Salvation anxiety.
Then we walked through the factory gates, where the clock was weaponized to violently discipline the human body into mechanical submission. And finally, we arrived at the modern knowledge worker, exhausted, cognitively fragmented, staring down a glowing inbox that never empties, while anxiously watching an artificial intelligence learn to do their job faster and cheaper.
It is a dizzying, often brutal trajectory when you lay it all out like that.
It really is.
But the most important, empowering takeaway from all of this history is this. The way we work today is not a fixed biological natural law.
Right?
It is a social agreement. It is a construct that has been endlessly, radically rewritten by new technology, by shifts in theology, and by whoever held the reins of power in any given era.
And because it was made up by humans.
It can be remade by humans again.
And that brings us to the final puzzle. A puzzle I want you, the listener, to really chew on as you go about the rest of your day.
It's a big one.
If the pessimists are right, if AI truly does take away the necessity of mass human labor over the next few decades, our biggest crisis is not going to be purely economic. The UBI check might clear, the rent might be paid, but our biggest crisis will be psychological.
We will face a massive societal vacuum of meaning.
Exactly. So I want you to think about this. If we had to design an entirely new societal institution from scratch, something that provides us with rigid time structure, with a diverse community outside our families, with a deep sense of collective purpose, and with a socially respected identity, but it has absolutely no boss, no clock-in times, and no paycheck attached to it, what would that actually look like?
It's a staggering thought experiment.
Could we invent a replacement for work before work as we know it disappears forever?
That is, without exaggeration, the existential question of the 21st century.
The next time you are sitting in traffic on your morning commute or staring blankly at that unread email in your inbox, think about that. Think about what you are really doing it all for.